In this video, I'm going to show you the top 30 Amazon listings for water bottles in the US, and the runner-up might surprise you if you haven't been paying attention. I'll also discuss what we can learn from the results, as well as show you how I came up with these estimates using a simple trick I learned from selling our own products on Amazon that a lot of people don't know about. All of this is based on publicly available information, can be used for any product and not just bottles, and best of all, it's free. And at the end, I'm going to have some disclaimers about the data, so be sure to stay for that because there are some important details to mention. So here's the top 30 list, which includes the stars rating, number of reviews, price, number of units sold within the last month on Amazon in the US, and finally the total revenue based on those numbers. Right at the top shouldn't be a surprise for anyone with Stanley's Quencher. But number 2 is a newcomer within the last few years with Owala, which also has a few other entries. Their free sip lid and the quirky colors have really struck a chord with many consumers. I just posted a longer video review, and that video is by far my best performing one yet, so people are clearly interested in this brand. There are also some that I've mentioned but I don't own yet, like Simple Modern, and there are some others that I've never even mentioned on this channel before, like Elo Cooper and Hydro Jug. Blender Bottle is on there too, and fun fact about them is that they're owned by the same company as Owala. Now it's interesting to see that Hydro Flask is still doing well, but they've really been overtaken by Yeti, Stanley, Owala, and even the knockoff Iron Flask. And at the very end of the list is Grail, which is really surprising. I actually just bought this bottle for an upcoming filtration test, and given that the bottle costs $100, it didn't take nearly as many sales to crack the top 30. And there were a few major brands that I did run the numbers for, but that did not make this list, including Zojirushi, Camelback, and Circle, though I'm sure Circle is notable because they don't really have a consistent Amazon presence. They're more known on Walmart, and I'm not entirely sure what's going on with their Amazon listings, but it almost seems like the listings that pop up are by resellers under the generic brand and then they get shut down, but it's kind of a whack-a-mole situation. Overall though, there aren't too many surprises on this list, but there are some things I noticed that I'll be diving into with future videos. Now it doesn't take long to notice something else about this list, and that's the sheer number of Yeti products. That's a result of how Yeti organizes their product listings on Amazon and how I compiled this data. Most brands like Hydro Flask, Owala, and Stanley list their bottles with variations for size and color combinations known as child variations that you can choose with the buttons that look like this within a single product listing, also known as the parent listing. Now this is all pretty technical about how Amazon works, but the reason why I'm bringing this up is that my estimation method uses the Amazon ranking for the parent listing and does not give sales data for each child variation. However, Yeti typically lists their size variations as completely separate parent listings, so I was able to get data for each Rambler size, and technically they are separate listings, so that's how I compiled them for the top 30 listings. With that in mind, here's an updated table that rearranges the top 30 listings into the top 24 bottle styles to get a more accurate comparison. So even though Stanley technically has the top single listing, Yeti is clearly the true winner and would have had the top listing if they consolidated their sizes into a single listing like Stanley, Hydro Flask, and so many other brands do. And if you further consolidate this list into the top brands, it narrows down to 15. Overall, there are 3 main things that I concluded. As I mentioned, Yeti clearly reigns supreme. This is also proven by the fact that they crossed $1 billion, and that's billion with a B, in revenue in their drinkware category in 2023. Their $8.5 million in sales on this list is 36% of the total $23.6 million in revenue. The next closest is Stanley with 3.8. Number 2, Owala is clearly a big player to watch, and their rapid rise has honestly been very impressive. As a brand, they came in third with 3.2 million. This is also the highest ranking for a traditional bottle that has vertical walls instead of tapered ones, and that leads into conclusion number 3. Tumblers with tapered bases are the biggest sellers by accounting for 57% of the total revenue from the top 30 listings. Now, if you're curious how I got these numbers, here's how I did it, along with some disclaimers so you know where these numbers come from and in case you'd like to try this out yourself. First, I looked up the best-selling bottles a few different ways, including by category, search terms, and by brand. I compiled all this information into a table that includes the ranking, number of reviews, and prices. But the key data point that you need need is not found at the top of the listing. Instead, scroll down to the additional information section, then look for the best sellers rank. You should see a couple numbers, and the bigger one is the number that you'll need. The other number is probably a little lower, and that's for a narrower category like insulated bottles. That can be useful for finding similar products, but you don't need it for this sales estimate. Next, take that main category best sellers rank and enter it into this free tool by Jungle Scout along with a market and category. I'll leave a link to this tool in the description if you'd like to check it out. Now, when you enter those numbers, Jungle Scout will give you an estimate for the number of units sold within the last month. And it's important to note that this is the number of units, it's not the revenue, so you do have to factor in the price yourself. You can use this free tool up to 10 times per day, or you can do a paid account for essentially unlimited searches. I'm not being paid by Jungle Scout, and I don't have any kind of relationship with them outside of having a free account, but I just appreciate that they make this tool free to use for new sellers and hobbyists so they can play around with it to get a sense of the data before paying for an account. I used to have a paid account with a similar competitor to Jungle Scout, and for professional sellers, there is an absolutely mind-boggling amount of information you can get from these services that can be broken down in many different ways. Now, with any data, it's important to know what could be wrong and what is not accounted for, so here are some disclaimers. Number one, I made this primarily for entertainment purposes, and the only thing I am absolutely certain about with this data is that it is incorrect and incomplete. I'll give more reasons why with the next disclaimers, but overall, it's best to view this data as ballpark estimates to give you an idea of how each of these brands rank next to each other. Number two, Amazon sometimes says right below the product rating how many units have been sold within the last month, but I don't know how accurate that really is. I've found that Jungle Scout gives higher sales estimates compared to what Amazon shows, but I also checked Jungle Scout's monthly sales estimates against some of our own products, and some were higher and others were lower. Now, our rankings are pretty low, and it's possible that Jungle Scout is more tuned in on the higher rankings. But regardless, I'm just going to stick with Jungle Scout for consistent comparisons. Number three, for product listings that show child variations for sizes, which is most of them, like Hydro Flask, Stanley, and Owala, I picked the middle price size for the revenue calculation to get more of a median price. But it's not perfect because realistically, sales will be different for each child variation. There's just not a great way to account for that with the way that I did this test. Number four, this is just based on Amazon listings in the US, so it doesn't include sales on each brand's own website or other online marketplaces like Walmart or Amazon in other countries. It also doesn't include wholesale revenue from in-person sales at brick and mortar outlets. If you were to factor in all of these different sales channels, it would absolutely change this list and bump up some brands like Hydro Flask while dropping down others like Iron Flask. Number five, this is just a snapshot from when I was making this video in the second half of July, and you can expect these rankings to change all the time. Just think about Owala. If you did this analysis 4 years ago, Owala wouldn't even be on the list. And number six, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, but Amazon is a jumbled mess. There are a ton of categories, and a lot of them overlap in ways that don't always make sense. I searched a bunch of different ways and compiled all the data that I could, but it's highly possible that I missed some bottles that should have made the top 30. Using a paid subscription to Jungle Scout or one of its competitors to do more in-depth searches and get other data breakdowns could have made this more accurate and less likely to overlook major listings. And to illustrate that point, I did a quick check of some of the larger categories after I nearly finished editing this video, and I found Brewmate's tumbler listed at number 10 in the kitchen and dining category. With a higher price of $48, that actually puts them above Stanley. Now, it's possible I made a mistake and overlooked them, but I don't think I did because I remember looking at this category. Sometimes listings can be temporarily invisible or unavailable if a product is out of stock, for example. And these numbers change all the time anyways, based on things like sales, holidays or Prime Day, and advertising campaigns that temporarily boost sales volume. Other listings had changed by then too, but given that there's a limit of 10 estimates per day with a free tool, there's really no way to get a fully accurate comparison for this amount of listings without having a paid account, so I decided to go ahead and post this video with the data that I had. I'm leaving links to the bottles in the description, and thank you if you purchase using a link. We get a small commission and it doesn't cost you anything extra. Thanks for watching and happy hydrating.